The On the Mark podcast is brought to you in part by Synovus. Synovus, the bank of here.
Welcome to On the Mark, a PGA Tour podcast. Here's your host, someone who walks inside the ropes but thinks outside the box, Mark Immelman.
Welcome indeed to On the Mark. Before we go ahead, a quick thank you. We are at 800,000 downloads and just a whisker away from 1 million. Yes, 1 million downloads of the On the Mark podcast is right on the horizon, and it is thank you to you, our tribe. I appreciate you. I am Mark Immelman, host of this podcast, and honored to be with you guys. It has just been so much fun to be on this ride. Our major goal is right on our horizon. Share this with your friends. Let's get there. When we get there, we're going to hand out some swag. I know I shouldn't date these podcasts because they live in the internet forever, but that's what makes it cool. This is a journey. It's a stitch in time right now. And that being said, I'm covering the 2018 Memorial Jacks tournament at Muirfield Village. As always, a complete spectacle, something to behold. We had Tiger Woods in our PGA Tour Live feature group yesterday morning. Man, grit, resilience, vintage Tiger Woods really. Came out and it was sort of eye-opening. The first 6 or 7 holes was 4 over par. But then from there just clicked into the gear. Found something, he said afterwards. He said it was just an adjustment in the ball position and the posture. Take heed, tribe, take heed. Adjustment in the posture and the ball position. He could make a better pivot from there. Started to drive the ball in the fairway. From there, made 4 birdies, shot even par, including a grinding par up the 9th hole, his last hole, for a par 4. So Woods 72. A number of the form guys we had, or featured guys, I should say, we had in our live window, sort of battled a bit. Rory McIlroy played well, battled on the greens. Jordan Spieth also a little inconspicuous really on the greens and sort of was struggling the ball striking. Dustin Johnson sort of sedate for a 72. All that being said, how about the names I've just tossed at you? PGA Tour Live. It is so much fun. If you don't have it already, get it. The greatest names in the game playing great golf, all available for you live, streaming Thursdays and Friday mornings. Round 2 upcoming today, but before we get to that, we got to get to some golf tips for you. That's why we exist. The podcast is here for you to gain more information that is easily understood, that is easily applied. We want to empower you to make correct decisions for your game so that you can do the right thing so you can achieve your goals. If you do so, let us know, please. I want to hear from you. The way to communicate with us is on Twitter. The handle is @OnTheMarkRadio. I am at Instagram, Mark_Immelman. All the podcasts are available at pgatour.com/podcasts or at pgatour.com/onthemark. iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, Amazon Play, Google Alexa. To use those, you've got to have the PGA Tour app, those last 2, just saying. Okay? Shauheen Nakhjavani is a tribe member, has been on the podcast before. If you have not listened to that podcast, maybe you should press pause right now, go and listen to the other one, find it in the podcast archives, and then come back to this. If not, cool, because Shauheen is a great mind, and he's got a great way of describing things in the golf swing that will help you to hit the golf ball better. This segment of the On the Mark podcast, it's brought to you by Synovus. Synovus, the bank of here.
Shauheen, welcome back, tribe member, Canada. How you doing, bro?
I'm doing great. How about you?
Yeah, it's nice to have you back. I'm good. It's good to have you on the line. You are doing some yeoman's work there north of the border, and so many folks follow you on social media. You're putting out all this content, great videos and such, helping folks. And I'm watching your following just grow exponentially, man. Must be lots of fun for you.
Yeah, it's good. I almost can't keep up with it, to be completely honest. For how many lessons I give these days between online and in person, it's a ton of fun. So happy to help people out.
Well, definitely. I mean, you give out good information. People keep improving. People tell people. And and the next thing you're a busy guy. So we're lucky to have you here. Now, before we get into matchups and straightening out those crooked golf shots, I want you to talk, you've been on our podcast before, but I want you to talk about how the partnership with Jeff Smith came about.
Yeah, so I've known Jeff for a little while, mainly because of social media, actually. We just have some friends in common in the industry. And Jeff had sent me a text message a couple of months ago, basically saying, that he loved my work and that he's seen me around and that he wanted to talk to me a little bit about this project that he actually is the one who started. And it's basically just going to be, a digital coaching platform, but that's going to be very informative, but it's almost going to be like a foundation for a golfer who's just starting out and really needs to know what are the important things to get him on the right foot without any bad habits.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, speaking of, let's dive right in. Here's Joe, average golfer at the club, number of them within earshot of this podcast. They hit a slice shot, the ball bends offline. Their buddy looks at them and said, well, you lift your head, and then the poor guy's trying to keep his head down and he still slices the golf ball. So I want to sort of ease our way into this with you describing to the listener how the slice shot happens, how the hook shot happens for that matter, and speak about the relationships that cause these crooked golf shots.
Right. So the most common one, obviously, that every instructor sees is the big slice. So for the right-handed golfer, that's the ball that either starts right and keeps going there or starts straight and leaks way out to the right.
Yeah.
So the most common reason behind this, very simply, wide open club face in the downswing. This is something that I see all the time. The golfer can keep his head down, but if that club face is open, that ball is going right no matter what he does.
Preach, brother.
Yeah, so open club face, which plays into the role of the wrist angles and the grip. Each of them have a very strong influence on what the club face is going to look like in the golf swing. So if the golfer wants to get off on the right foot, first thing he needs to do, look at his hands and arms and the wrists. What are they doing in the swing? So are you rolling the club face open early? Is it starting out straight and then you're opening it up in the backswing? And these are really the most important pieces that I would suggest any golfer take a look at first and foremost.
Okay, I like that. But then your average golfer out there, they hit the slice shot and their buddy says, well, you came over the top. And then golfer in question tries to make a more on-point delivery and he comes in from a bit straighter, but that slice starts farther to the right. So speak a little bit about the path-face relationship as it happens with a slice shot.
Yeah, so the curve is going to be defined 100% basically by two things, which are the club face and the club path at impact. So there are some other things that have an influence, but these are the two largest factors that play a role. And so the way that the ball is going to curve is going to be between the relationship of the two. So if the face is more to the right of the path, for that right-handed golfer, the ball will curve right, no matter what the face looks like.
Okay, yeah.
So you could, technically speaking, have a club face that's actually pointing left at impact, but if the path is way further left, that ball's still going to curve to the right.
Okay, and I want to stop you there. And so for golfers who've been on launch monitors, who hit a slice shot, and they see the face looking 1 or 2 degrees left, that would be the reason why, right?
Yeah, if that ball sliced to the right, I would put a lot of money on it that path is even further left than that club face.
All right, so it's path and face relationship. Obviously, the draw shot, the opposite thereof, whereas the slicer has the open club face. The draw guy or the hook guy has the face that's more closed, correct?
Correct.
All right. So, okay, you've spoken about it before in your previous podcast. Jeff Smith, I think, borrowed this from you. We're gonna credit you with it. You spoke of matchups, and I loved your description there and how things work together. Way back in the day, someone said to me, he goes, I've got corresponding faults in my swing and they get together to conspire to make the ball go straight. And it was a funny sort of way of describing it, but he had a big, strong grip and then he had a certain delivery that allowed him to square that up. And so it was a matchup, as you describe it. So speak to some matchups and sort of enlighten the listener a little bit about that, please.
Yeah, so before I even get into it, I actually want to give Jeff the shout out there. I wasn't the one who coined the phrase. I actually don't know. I actually don't know who coined the phrase, to be honest. But yeah, there's a ton of us using that term right now, for sure.
Okay, so speak about matchups. Describe, give an example of a matchup as you see it.
Right, so I'm actually going to go into one that's very important, and it's going to lead us into what I wanted to talk about a little bit, which is everything you do in the golf swing is going to have an influence on the path, either more in to out or more out to in.
Okay.
So let's say, for example, that you have a very inside-out path. The shaft is nice and shallow. The club face looks good and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to throw out a ballpark number and say that, for example, the path is +5 to the right for the right-handed golfer.
All right, yeah.
Well, you could actually neutralize that path to be 0 without changing the variables that are already in play. So you wouldn't have to touch the shaft, you wouldn't have to touch the club face, but you could say, let the golfer turn more to the left, and all of a sudden that matchup combined will equal 0. And I'm going to explain why that is.
Hey, I want to stop you there because on a previous podcast, Grant Waite spoke about this and spoke about why Christy Kerr, for argument's sake, would have to aim more right to hit a draw shot, and whereas Adam Scott, who had a little bit more path right than what she did, he could basically aim straight down the fairway and hit the big high draw.
Yeah, so because everything is connected in the golf swing, you know, the hands are connected to the arms, which are connected to the shoulders and so forth, the more the body wants to rotate, so for the right-handed golfer, the more left your body is going to turn, the more the path wants to get to the left.
Copy that. All right.
So you could have a bunch of variables in play without talking about rotation that shoot your path way out to the right, and if that golfer rotates, he could actually neutralize that outward club path.
All right. So just an adjustment at address could neutralize things, is by your description.
Right. At address, you can manipulate it. You can manipulate it through in the middle of the golf swing as well. There are tons of ways to go about it. But you could have two different factors where one is influencing the path to the right and one is influencing the path to the left. And if you combine the two, you could hit a dead straight ball flight.
Awesome. And then, so you're just talking about path now. Obviously, the face, you described the fact in this instance, this example, the face was appropriate. The face was basically square to wherever the golf club was moving.
Right, exactly. That's assuming that the face remained constant the whole time.
Mm-hmm. Any other examples, perhaps, of a matchup? Because I'm sure the folks are intrigued now.
Yeah, for sure. So we can talk about the most basic one, which is the grip and the wrist angle.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, you read a lot of things out there of people saying you absolutely need to have a neutral grip when you swing. And to be completely honest, that's actually really not the case. I mean, you see a wide range of different grips on tour.
Yeah, it's so true.
Anything from very strong in terms of rotary position to very weak.
Okay.
You just need to have the grip pair up with the wrist angle to keep the club face square, and you'll be totally fine. So I'll give some examples.
Oh, I love you. I love where you're going, brother. Because you know what? I saw a client this morning who said to me, well, is my grip good? And I said, well, your grip is functional given how your wrists move. And he sort of looked at me as if I fell off Mars. And then I explained to him how the grip and the wrist angle allowed the face to play as he desired, because so many folks just get their hands on the club, or they go to their professional and they hold the club, yet they still hit slices or hooks or whatever the case might be. So I'm glad you're going where you are.
Yeah, so let's assume that a golfer has a very strong grip. So for the right-handed golfer, I'll give you a little visual. That would mean that the glove hand is rotated very above the handle, and the trail hand, so the right hand, would be rotated very underneath.
All right,
so those lines between the index finger and the thumb are pointing to like the right shoulder.
Copy that.
That golfer has a lot more room to turn his wrist into flexion, so to kind of bow the hand inwards. So because of that, he is going to likely have a very closed club face.
Okay.
So the stronger grips lend themselves to more closed club faces, and the neutral grips lend themselves to more open club faces.
Okay.
So for this reason, the guy who plays with a strong grip does not necessarily need to bow his hand inwards, because he might actually close it too far.
So be careful what you're reading in the golf magazine or watching on the Golf Channel, because it's very sexy right now to bow that thing like Brooks Koepka or DJ. But if you've got a strong grip, you've got to be a bit careful. Is that what you're saying?
Right. So the guy who has a strong grip is probably better off playing with actually some of a cupped form of a wrist angle or max neutral. If he gets anywhere towards that flexed or bowed position, he's probably going to have a club face that is way too closed.
And so in other words, all of these matchups are always sort of directing themselves towards club faces alignment or swing path. It's not just how it looks on a camera. Is that what you're saying?
That is absolutely correct. So a guy who, for example, and I know that Jeff mentioned this too, like John Rahm, who has a very weak grip, he needs to have his wrist very bowed, because if he has a weak grip, which lends itself to more of an open club face position, and he cups his wrist even further, that club face is going to be wide open in his golf swing.
And funnily enough, I saw him maybe a couple seasons ago at the World Golf Championships Bridgestone on the range, and he was sort of swinging up and sort of cupping the wrist in practice, but he was doing this to hit a real soft, feathery kind of a lob shot. It wasn't some full-blooded drive shot.
Right, so he's doing this to play a specific type of ball flight.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. So you've spoken about the strong grip, so then conversely, I assume, and you can describe it, for the weaker grip with the hand turned left for the right-hander, they can afford to John Rahm it a bit more.
Right, so I would actually suggest that the guy who plays with a weak grip actually have more of a bowed or flexed position on the wrist angle, because it'll help him avoid roll the club face wide open.
Example of this being Jordan Spieth, the modern-day example.
Right.
Awesome
Him,
stuff.
you can even go in the route of John Rahm like we just spoke.
Oh, tremendous stuff. Okay, you've given good examples of matchups. Now, I know the folks who saw the title of this podcast, and that's like Fix Your Slice. They're like, okay, where's the slice fixing coming along? So let's talk about this a bit. You've described that the slice happens because the face is open to path. More than likely, the golfer's reacting and chopping across it to somehow get the shot functional. How do we straighten the slice shot using proper matchups, Shauheen?
Right. So obviously the first thing we would look at is the club face, and we can get that club face dialed in and get him or her to no longer roll it open.
Mm-hmm.
But believe it or not, there are a couple of things in play that a lot of people don't really look at with regards to slicing. And this is kind of the route I wanted to go with this matchup podcast, was to specifically talk about a term that we like to call lead arm depth.
Okay, go ahead.
And so basically what it means is, where are the hands relative to the body in the downswing? Or you can even talk about in the backswing.
Okay, well, why don't we start at the start and sort of take it the entire way through this golf, where the hands depth journey goes?
Yeah, so I'll give visuals of two different extreme cases.
Okay, shoot.
So a golfer who has very little depth in the swing, so they have almost no depth in their golf swing, would be a guy like Justin Thomas. So you see that the hands are high, but they're not very far behind his body.
Mm-hmm.
You would almost see them more over the toes of his feet at the top of the backswing.
Okie dokie.
And then you can look at an opposite extreme, more like a guy like Jason Duffner or Ricky Fowler, who have the hands way behind them at the top of the backswing. So that once they're at the top, the hands would be a little more in line with the heels of their feet or even their glutes.
All right, I got it. We see the image.
Yeah, so the further behind the body the hands are getting, the more depth these golfers are adding.
Mm-hmm. And how is that beneficial as the swing transpires?
Right. So because a lot of people rotate towards the target in the downswing, and we discussed this earlier, that the more rotation you're going to have, the more left you're going to want to swing for the right-handed golfer.
Copy that.
If you have very little depth at the top of your backswing, so like a Justin Thomas, and you rotate really well, your hands are going to kick even further out in front of you than they already are, and you're going to swing way across that golf ball from out to in.
Now, when you talk about rotate, most folks toss out the term rotate and they instantly go to the backswing. Your explanation here is rotation back toward the target on the downswing.
Right. So if we're talking about the downswing, when you rotate in the backswing, your hands want to get more behind you. Mm-hmm. And when you rotate in the downswing, your hands want to get more in front of you.
Okay.
So if your hands are already fairly in front of you at the top of your backswing and you rotate really well, your hands are going to be directly over that golf ball. You're going to swing really aggressively out to in a slice pattern.
Copy. So then would you contend, because I'm sure folks are going to start tweeting us as they listen to this, mm-hmm. Would you contend that the higher hand golfer, and I'm thinking of a Jack Nicklaus in this instance, they would be more prone to hitting a fade shot or a slice shot a little easier? Is that your contention?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. And then, well, then, okay, now I'm going to toss things at you and let you respond, because I'm thinking like the listener. Ben Hogan, that is, was noted for his fade shot, and he could, deliver this thing on demand, as did Lee Trevino. They both came from a deeper arm and hand position. Unpack that for the listener, just for understanding's sakes.
Right. So the way I look at depth with regards to the golf swing is I look at them at a certain point in the downswing, which would be when that lead arm, so the left arm for the right-handed golfer, Let's assume that we're halfway in the downswing, so that arm is around parallel to the ground.
Copy that.
So for the instructors out there, they call that position 5.
All right.
Now, when you are at that point in the downswing, you are, depending on how deep you are more likely to play one ball flight or the other. So you could have really deep hands in the backswing, but if you have a hand pass on the way down that goes really far out in front of you horizontally, you can still technically play that fade shot all day long.
All right. I'm seeing where you're going here.
Yeah, so if you look at these golfers who played the fade, even though they were deep in the backswing, they get their hands more out in front of them on the way down.
Case in point, perhaps a Cooch for Matt Kuchar, or perhaps a Jason Duffner, modern-day golfers, you'd say?
Yes, exactly right. So if you look at the complete opposite extreme of that, you would see a guy like Rory McIlroy who has very deep hands coming down. So his hands are very far behind his body. He is more likely to play a draw bias pattern just based off that.
Okay, I'm going to toss this one at you too, because I love what you're saying, and I love the explanation of the hand path and how it applies to the clubhead's path. But, then, for a while it was kind of a catchphrase. I think it's sort of going away now a little bit. All the better golfers would speak of getting stuck in the downswing, and they can't get the club back to the ball. And then they all try to get their arms back in front of them, and then the next thing, they get themselves way too steep on the downswing. So talk about getting stuck a little bit for me.
Yeah, so the most common reason that golfers get stuck would be a combination between the hands that are very deep with a club pad that is very far behind them, and they likely pull the hands even further behind them to start the downswing. All
right, so the hands are deep, and then they actually fall more deep as you transition into your downswing.
Yeah, so they're actually doing a really poor transition where they're not rotating their body very well, and the hands are getting caught even further back, and now they're going to shallow the club really late, and they're stuck with a path that is too strong from in to out.
Okay. So now for the listeners listening to this, I mean, obviously the slicers will figure, okay, I'm not deep enough at P5, or perhaps I'm too high at the top of my backswing. Talk a bit about that, and then speak about how we can go about rectifying this stuff, because I've always loved your explanation of how you get the club situated in the downswing is going to define really what starts to happen through contact.
So depending obviously on the golfer, I would look at it in one of two ways. And I actually just had a professional that I spoke about this with this morning, which is kind of ironic, where if you pull everything really inside in the backswing too quick and too low, you could actually have a backswing that is considered too stuck, and the only way for that golfer to free themselves up is to shoot everything really up above them.
Okay, I get you. All right.
Now, if that golfer does this type of pattern, he is likely going to have the hands start traveling even further out in front of him on the way down, and he's going to end up slicing it, which is why the backswing is very important too.
Ah, I see. Okay, cool.
So what I would do with that golfer is I might actually get them more of a neutral takeaway so that they can gradually get the hands behind them as opposed to doing it too soon.
Hey, just for, again, I'm thinking from understanding's sake. Like, you as a golfer, we've all got iPhones or Androids or whatever they use, perhaps cameras. When they're videoing themselves from down the line, you talk about lead arm depth. At the top of the swing, in an ideal world, and I know this is a generic, but is there like a medium, a neutral, if you will, as to where you like the arm to sit in relation to the chest at the top of the backswing?
Yeah, so if we're looking from that down-the-line view, and for those who don't know what that is, that's the angle that's most commonly used when they're showing shots on television.
Yeah.
I like to generally see the lead arm right up the trail shoulder. So if we're talking for a right-hander, I would like to see that left arm looking like it's going right over the right shoulder at the top of the backswing.
Okay.
And that would generally have a depth that is fairly neutral. So you wouldn't have the hands too far above them, but they wouldn't have the hands too flat and far behind them either. Okay,
and if they were dropping a plumb line down from the handle of the club, because I saw a video you put up on social media where there was this guy, the handle traveled in behind him, the wrist cup, the face and club were across the line, and magic, abracadabra, you got the guy on the line all of a sudden. Says they're looking at, if they're dropping like a plumb line down from the handle, where should that sit in relation to their body?
So I would like to see them over the heels of the feet, personally.
I love it. Okay, cool. All right, and then now from there, we've got the thing into a better position. Talk about the depth of the arm and how it starts to work on the way down? Should the handle sort of trace where it went coming back, or how do you see this transpiring?
So in that type of scenario, it's kind of case by case. There are some golfers who can get away with a hand pass that is a little more out in front of them on the downswing. And we actually see this with one of the greats ever in Arnold Palmer.
Okay, yes.
And you can actually see the opposite for a guy like Rory, who has the hands really out in front of him on the backswing, and he actually drops them way behind him coming down.
Kind of like a Furyk or Ryan Moore then perhaps too, right?
Right, that's exactly right.
Okay, cool.
And so depending on what the golfer is doing, we would work on either trying to get them deeper coming down or try to get them more out in front of them coming down.
Lovely. Okay, exercises, drills, or something to that effect that could help them to do this. Let's talk about the guy that's not deep enough right now. Give us an exercise or a drill that the perhaps can go and practice on the practice tee.
Yeah, so I'm going to give you the best field drill that any golfer could have to increase the depth of the lead arm. So to make sure that the hands stay a little more behind them coming down.
All right, shoot.
So let's say we're looking at the lead arm.
Mm-hmm.
So what I like to do is I like to focus on the area of that arm where the watch would sit if you're wearing a watch strap.
On the back, right?
So towards the end of the forearm inside, just inside the hands.
I see.
In transition to the downswing, I like to get them to feel like that area is going to press backwards into their chest.
And then you're going to use the chest to drive it.
That's exactly right. So if you want to keep the hands back and still rotate really well, you could theoretically have that left arm for the right-hander, so the lead arm, feeling like it's pressing backwards into the body. So like the edge of the forearm would feel like it's pressing into the trail pec. And that would really push the hands way behind them coming down, and they'll improve their depth.
I was about to say, you know what, you say that, and I now rarely see McIlroy. I can see the depth at the top of the backswing, but I see in what you describe how the body's pivot sort of drives that deep arm back in front of him.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
I love that. How about the guy that gets that thing a little too deep? I know this is more for the slicers here, but I'm sure there's one or two guys that fight a hook shot listening. What's your take over there?
Right. So for the guys who are hitting the hooks and their hands are getting too far back behind them, what I'll do is I'll actually do more rotational drills, because as we discussed at the beginning, the more the golfer could rotate, the more they can get the hands out in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
So oftentimes what you see is, when the golfer loads in the backswing, they create certain tilts. So they'll have like the tilt line of the shoulders, where the lead shoulder will be lower than the trail side.
Yeah.
And that same concept applies to the golfer's hips.
I copy. I got you.
Well, if the golfer loses those tilts, meaning they get the lead shoulder and the lead hip really high, really quick in transition, those hands are going to drop way too far behind their body.
So they're not pivoting basically around their axis then.
Right. So
Okay.
they're not pivoting correctly, and they're losing their tilts way too quick right as they initiate the downswing. They're likely going to have a pass that is way too severely from in to out.
And golfers, if you've been accused by someone that your head's dropping back on the way down and through contact, you're more than likely what Shauheen's describing. You agree with me?
Yes, absolutely.
I love it. Hey, you say pivot drills. You've described beautifully how you can use that lead arm and sort of push against the chest for the slicers, and that will keep the arm depth good. What about a pivot drill or two that folks can go and practice? I mean, I'm imagining, given your description of the shoulder losing its tilts, that just pure pivot drills with a club across the shoulders or something would suffice, or do you have anything else?
So there's one common drill that I actually post quite often on social media, and I'm sure some of the listeners have probably seen this from me before.
Yeah, okay.
But what I would do is I would take an alignment stick, and I would actually put it through the two front belt loops.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I'm going to do is I would stick a large majority of that alignment stick outside the lead side of the golfer's hips.
Okay, so it's like a reference.
Yeah. So when they load in the backswing, what we tend to see is that alignment stick will point a little bit lower towards the ground because their hips are working on a tilt, or their pelvis is working on a tilt.
Yeah.
And what I would get them to do is really exaggerate the feeling of having that tilt maintained. So that alignment stick should almost turn around them while still pointing to the ground.
I see. And I'm assuming then that as they do that, they will more than likely feel the pressure shift from the trail heel sort of into the forward portion of the lead foot. You'd agree?
Yeah, so it's going to want to feel very much like they're turning on a swivel right towards the lead heel, really hard around their body.
Love it, man. That's awesome. Cool. Okay, so that's a neat drill. I mean, I'm bouncing all over the show here, but it's great stuff that you're sharing. Here's a golfer, he's got the lead arm thing going on, and he never thought he had a closed club face because no one's ever told him or he's been unawares of it. But he's got that face a little too open. So he gets the lead arm depth improved, but he's still hitting sort of white block slices. Talk to something he could do to get that face beefed up so he can then start to deliver the powerful flight and the little baby draw.
Yeah, so if he has a really good club path and he rotates really well, but he's still struggling with a massive slice, especially if he already has depth to the lead arm, I would take a close look at specifically the grip and what it's doing. Because it is very possible that even if they have some amount of flexion or a flat wrist, that their grip is just too weak for their mechanics and it's not a good matchup for them.
I understand. Got you.
So in that scenario, it could really be just as simple as a grip change to make the face more closed and just work better for their type of golf swing.
And a poem I learned way back in the day was if your shots bend to the right, rotate your hands to the right and then grip the club. And if your shots bend to the left, rotate your hands to the left and then grip the club. You agree? What's your take?
Right. So with that type of pattern, I would suggest that really it's case by case, where there are certain golfers who can benefit from a grip change for their matchups. There are certain golfers where the grip is really not their issue. So it really depends on what they're doing.
Well, talk then too, because I know Jeff did some and you've talked about it before. But, for me, the hands and the wrists are the tip of the spear. They're your only port of contact with the club. Speak about the wrist alignments some too, because it's very in vogue nowadays. And, I guess the Dustin Johnsons of the world have made folks more aware of this, because DJ goes from a big bowed wrist at the top and he hits hard, powerful fades. So talk about how to get that wrist more extended and how to get the wrist more flexed.
Yeah, so what I would do is, let's assume that we're dealing with a golfer who has a very neutral grip.
Mm-hmm.
What I would do is I would take a close look at how the wrist is moving specifically in the takeaway. So let's assume position 2 when that shaft gets parallel. Right off the bat in the get-go. What I would do is I would look at what is the glove hand doing in the golf swing. And so I actually use the glove, believe it or not, as actually a training aid very often for wrist angles.
Do you stick a T in it?
So there are certain tools you can use, but you can use a visual feedback of the logo of your golf glove.
Okay, right.
And so in the takeaway, if the logo of your golf glove on that neutral grip is going to point right up to the sky really early on, you are going to more than often have a very cupped wrist.
I see what you're saying. Copy?
And if you want to go for the opposite route, so you really want to work on exaggerating, trying to flatten the wrist out or get it towards flexion, similar to a DJ, then try to work on exaggerations where the logo of that golf glove actually points really hard to the ground in the takeaway, and that'll get your club face super closed.
Okay. All right. Here's the $1 million question, and you've been so gracious with your time as always, Shauheen. So the wrists are properly aligned, the arm depth is appropriate, the club now is approaching contact, the body is leading, there's decent, presentation of the club face. Talk about, from just prior to contact through to completion, because a lot of folks sort of, the next thing they whip themselves out of their shape and the club doesn't bottom out like it should. I want you to talk a little bit about just, the delivery through contact and up to the completion of the swing as you see it in a decent model.
Right. So the more that the golfer has depth to their swing when they're coming down, the more appropriately they can rotate, and the hands are actually going to want to exit more in and around their body.
I love it. Okay.
And so that will actually stabilize their club face and avoid it turning over too soon, similar to what some golfers do as a flip pattern.
You all right?
If the golfer has less depth coming down, they are probably better off rotating actually less and having the hands and club exit a little more down the line.
Hey, you know what? I'm glad you said that, because, there's buzz phrases always tossed around. The next thing, some poor golfer's trying some other golfer's medication, like rotate and swing left, and the next thing he's helped himself from the frying pan into the fire.
Yeah, so this is really just what boils down to matchups at the end of the day, where the more depth you have, the more, I guess you can say, incentivized you are to want to rotate around your body, because you can afford it as a functional position.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have very little depth to your hands coming down and your hands are way out in front of you, if you don't want to play a very fade bias pattern, you can't afford to rotate as much, and you're almost better off stalling and having the hands exit down the target line.
Yeah, I like that, man. That's really cool. And then as the club finishes, obviously, I know I'm sort of saying stuff that you and I both know, but it's for understanding. If the club's exiting left, you'll see a golfer with more right side or trail side delivery through the golf shot, and the guy who's got the thing down the target, or the girl for that matter, and I think it's good for girls to try that, they will see a more right side sort of underneath or trail side underneath up to the finish. You agree?
Yes, I agree 100%. And all of that depends really on the characteristics that are happening behind them in the downswing.
Hey, that's really cool stuff, man. So basically, to summarize, it's a lot about lead arm depth, and it's worthwhile perhaps even, going to practice in front of a mirror to get a sense for where one is, right?
Yes, absolutely. And like I said, take a look closely at that position 5 when that lead arm gets parallel in the downswing. Take a look at where your hands are relative to the chest, and try to keep your hands more behind you coming down if you're a slicer, and I guarantee you'll shift your path more into out.
Well, I've got to say this too. It's amazing when that arm gets across the chest, how there's a force that you put on your chest where you can actually work really hard in the rotation of the torso to kind of swing that thing around the corner. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, 100%. And we see this with a guy similar to Sergio Garcia.
Yeah, that's great stuff, man. You've been a superstar with your stuff as usual. I look forward to the channel that you guys are going to release here shortly. But in the meantime, Shauheen, share the social media and such where the folks can find you.
Yeah, so pretty simple. All my social media platforms are all the exact same. I'm known online as Shauheen Golf. So to spell that out, it's just SHKEEN Golf.
And that's beautiful stuff. All right, keep up the good work. Keep that content coming. I love it, and I'm sure our global audience are loving it too. Thanks for your time, man.
I appreciate it, Mark. Glad to be on.
This segment of the On the Mark podcast was brought to you by Synovus. Synovus, the bank of here. As always, really interesting stuff and really easily applicable stuff. If you haven't listened to Shauheen's previous podcast with us, go and find it in our cache. Just search Shauheen, that's Shauheen, Nakhjavani, in our cache, and you will find his other podcast with us. It was as good. But I just want to quickly put a bow on this and say those matchups in your golf swing are crucial, and understanding how they work together are crucial. And so understanding just one tip in isolation might be the key, but it might also not be your key. The athlete in you is going to find a way to finagle things to get the golf ball to the targets. So, if you've got something going on and it's idiosyncratic, and then you go for a golf lesson with whoever, and then you start changing that stuff, understand more often than not, if you've been playing golf for a while, there's one or other corresponding compensation that you've made in an effort to rectify whatever's gone on. That's the matchup, in order to present that club face appropriately. Now, if you want to change ball flight, then maybe you have to change both of those. And remember, there'll always be two adjustments. If you're just wanting to tighten up things, understand how those two matchups work together. Or find the issue, find the matchup, find the compensation, and just work on kind of, tightening those things up a little bit. Maybe not completely overhauling things. That decision is up to you. Because you must then, before you make that decision, have a thorough understanding of exactly what your goals are. So go to your golf lessons, go to your golf swing work, and go to your golf instruction with an idea as to what your goals are, because they will govern and they will help you navigate adjustments. But understanding how things work together in the golf swing to get the golf ball to perform in a desired manner is very, very important. And I'm so glad that Shauheen dealt with both the rotation and someone who's perhaps a little more open would have to sort of stall out the body a bit more to square the face. That's up to you. There's been many golfers that have played the game well either way. It's just committing to what you've got to do and understanding exactly where you want to go and what you've got to do to achieve that, and then also having a healthy understanding of what you're able to do. That's where maybe a TPI assessment or something to that effect may help you, so that you can figure out, okay, am I physically capable of making this adjustment, whatever it might be. It's lots of fun. I want to leave you with that. Working on your golf swing, working on your game is a lot of fun. Remember always, and I'm going to make this a bit of a mantra, go for the low-hanging fruit. Go and improve around the greens. Go and get better from inside 50, 60 yards. You will see your score come down. Now, hitting flush irons, hitting powerful long straight drives, that is lots of fun, I know. And tinkering on the golf swing, it's one of my favorite things to do when I do get to practice. But don't just go and tinker for the sake of tinkering. Have an idea, know how things match up, know what's necessary, know how things work together. It's a cool deal, and the more you start to delve into these things, the better. So from now on, look at your golf swing from a action-reaction sort of a situation. Remember, to every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. That applies in your golf swing too. All of our podcasts can be found at pgatour.com/podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, Amazon Alexa, Google Play, the PGA Tour app. You know the place. Tell your friends about it. We've got 1 million downloads to hit. Get out, play golf, have lots of fun. Take it easy.
This broadcast and all associated rights, including copyright, are owned exclusively by the PGA Tour and may not be used in whole or in part without the prior written permission of the PGA Tour.
Synovus is the bank of here. Here is a fairway that took shape before engines replaced horses. Here's where some days you lay up, and others you just go for it. Here's where you don't even need a tee time. And here is where a casual conversation on the back nine turns into a successful business expansion. Here should be the most important place to your bank, because here is where you are. Synovus, the bank of here. Banking products provided by divisions of Synovus Bank, member FDIC, equal housing lender.